This podcast is part of the Gun Rights Radio Network. Podcasting freedom.
Hello and welcome to episode 62 of Shooting the Breeze, the formal gun podcast of WaltonPA.com. In this episode, we've got a Philly area sheriff raising $20,000 on a gun raffle. A police chief turns to citizens during the ammo shortage. Ben Steger is interviewed on the Gun Dudes podcast. We've got a match report from Tom over at Fill Your Hands. And for the discussion topic, a couple of weeks back, I witnessed a guy put a .45 ACP round into his leg. Have I piqued your interest yet? Before we get started with the news and the discussion topics and, the featured content and, the meat and potatoes of the podcast, if you will, I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up. This podcast is sort of flying by the seat of my pants. I'm grossly unprepared. A week and a half ago, I had a death in the family, and things have been really, really hectic ever since. And actually, as of last night, I really hadn't given any thought whatsoever to this podcast, and I'm in that phase where I'm just trying to keep my mind busy. So rather than kind of sit around and twiddle my thumbs, I decided to sit down and record, a podcast and see where it goes. So bear with me as we move through this podcast, and keep your fingers crossed. Let's hope it turns out well. Okay, the first piece of news comes from Philly.com, and it is entitled Rifle Raffle Controversy, $20,000 for Chesco K9 Unit. And this is from Chester County, Pennsylvania. And it goes on to say, an AR-15 rifle with a big boost from a controversy has helped the Chester County Sheriff's Department raise more than $20,000 for its K9 unit. But the man who won the rifle in a raffle said it is unlikely a single shot will ever be fired from his prize. Mike Ivy, who has owned an auto repair shop in Westchester for 27 years, said he entered the raffle after hearing about it on a TV news program. And he's so proud of the prize that he plans to frame it and hang it on his wall, right next to his winning ticket. The gun will probably never, ever, ever be shot, he said, laughing. The Sheriff's Department began selling $20 tickets for the raffle at a January charity dinner for hunters and law enforcement personnel. The raffle wasn't publicized. Tickets could be purchased only through the deputy sheriffs, and organizers were expecting to sell about 500. The word spread that the top prize was an AR-15, identified by law enforcement officials as the primary weapon used in the shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut in December. Anti-gun violence groups cried foul, contending that raffling off an AR-15 was insensitive and irresponsible. Until the publicity, we had maybe sold 200 to 300 tickets. And that was since January, Sheriff Carolyn Bunny Welsh said. The department ended up selling more than 1,000. Welsh stressed that whoever won the rifle would be required to undergo 2 background checks, one from the Sheriff's Department and another at the licensed firearm dealer where they could claim their prize. The drawing was held on Monday. On Wednesday, Welsh said he was very comfortable with the fact that Ivy was the winner. He's a reputable businessman with a good background, she said. Ivy said Wednesday that he had been contacted by some residents who expressed concern, but even more had called to congratulate him. I figured I have the right to bear arms, and they were giving the right to the general public to buy a raffle ticket, he said. I was supporting the K9 unit and the sheriffs at the same time. Ivy has other guns that are kept locked in safes, and his house is fully alarmed, he said. Once an avid hunter, he said he hasn't gone hunting since he was injured in a car accident last year. Don't ever underestimate a fast-moving Chevy over an AR-15, he said, laughing. Anti-gun violence advocates said that while they had reservations about the raffle, they were heartened by the fact that Welsh required Ivy to undergo a background check before announcing him as the winner. We hope that if this gentleman does decide to sell this gun at some point, that he would do a background check too, and that a law would be passed to require it, said Sherry Goodman, director of Ceasefire PA. Still, she said it was inappropriate for the sheriff's office to raffle off a gun. If they're going to do a fundraiser, we didn't want it to be through guns, she said. It was just a whole different perspective of what you think law enforcement should be doing and how they should be raising money. Proceeds from the raffle will help the county's 6-dog K9 unit pay for training equipment, Welsh said. She's not sure whether the department will feature guns in next year's raffle. Ivy, for his part, said he was committed to gun safety and proud of his win. Guns don't kill people. People kill people, he said. If you're allowed to own it, if you're a responsible person that keeps gun locked and secure and away from children, I would say buy a raffle ticket. You can win. So this is kind of interesting that that it was spun as this evil black rifle that aided the killer in the Sandy Hook massacre, and the sheriff was inappropriately putting this evil death machine out to the public where someone could win it for as little as a $20 raffle ticket. That was kind of amusing that they spun it that way. I'm not surprised at all, considering this came out of a Philadelphia newspaper, but I'm really glad that it worked out for the sheriff's department. I mean, the fact that a background check was done prior to announcing the winner is kind of a no-brainer. It would have been done anyway. And then on top of that, there was another background check done at the business where the gun was picked up. I mean, duh, it happens. That's just the way it works. So why anyone from the paper is shocked to see that background checks are being done was kind of a surprise on me. I think it was a good thing. It raised a lot of money for the K-9 unit, and I really hope they do it again next year. That that little bit of controversy seems to have helped the raffle in a big way, and donations went where they needed to go. And the sheriff seems very pleased with himself, or with herself, for having raised this type of money for the unit. So win-win for everybody, I think. All right, up in the next piece of news, this comes from Northland's News Center. Police chief turns to citizens during ammo shortage. Goes on to say, Duluth, Minnesota. A nationwide ammunition shortage has police departments across the country counting their bullets. It's no different in Proctor, where the chief says he was told he'd have to wait months, even a year, to get more ammo. I was really surprised. Let's just put it that way, said Chief Walt Wobig on the difficulty of getting ammunition. Warburg said that when he asked suppliers for 1,000 rounds of ammo his officers needed for training, he was told he'd have to wait for months. I go, do you have 40 caliber qualification rounds? And they go, well, no, it's going to take 6 to 8 months to get them, said Wobong, conservative of a conversation with a manufacturer. Retailers say the nationwide shortage is in part due to people stockpiling ammunition in response to the recent proposed gun legislation. It was getting a little short last fall, so they were really behind, but there definitely is a panic, said Superior Shooter Supply owner Paul Kukel of the shortage. We've been here for 35 years and have never seen anything like it. With the Proctor Police Department in need of ammunition, the chief sent out a call asking for help. Who answered? The very people his officers are sworn to protect. The citizens were like, if you need something, we've got plenty here, said Wobig. A citizen and Proctor police officer loaned their personal ammunition to the department, a total of 1,500 rounds. The chief says others were willing to help too. I had several other calls from the citizens that said, hey, if you need ammunition, we've got plenty here. I know that if I need ammunition, I have citizens out there that will gladly come forward. The chief says he still has ammunition on order and will be repaying the citizens for their contributions when the department is able to. He also sent in a request to Senators Al Franken and Amy Klobuchar for help regarding the ammunition shortage. So this is kind of interesting. Obviously, it's not just us consumers that are having difficulty with the ammunition shortage. It is police departments and other enforcement agencies as well. And I'm kind of torn about this whole issue. If it were my local sheriff, who is very pro-gun and just been a pleasure to work with as far as gun things are concerned in the county, I think I would be willing to help out modestly. I mean, obviously I can't replenish my stock, so I would I would help a little bit if I could. However, if this came out of somewhere like Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Police Department needed rounds, I would probably turn my back on them just because of how anti-gun they are. And if this were to happen in some place like Philadelphia, I don't know that they would even would even pay the citizens back with rounds when they came in. They'd probably require the citizens to go through a background check before they could pick up the rounds that they loaned the police department. So I'm really happy that people were able to come together and help the community. I think that's really important, and that sends a very strong message that the community seems to be behind the sheriff and what he's about and what he's doing for the community. So I think that's a really good thing. I've read a couple of different things on the web about this story, and there were a lot of people that were on the fence. Some were kind of leaning towards being willing to help, if it were in their area, and others just flat out said no. Get your own. It's hard enough to come by. The government is buying billions with a B of rounds. Get it from the feds. So it's kind of a touchy subject. Kind of interesting the way it all turned out, but in the end, it seems to have worked, and no one is upset. So win-win, I suppose. All right, first up in featured content, this is this is the area of the podcast where I talk about some of the cooler things I found on the web, and I don't necessarily read it to you word for word right off of a website. And the first item I want to talk about is, I believe it's episode 249 of the Gun Dudes podcast. It features Ben Steger. He talks about his accomplishments as a shooter. He offers the guys some advice. He just kind of talks about himself and things like that. And I thought the interview went really well. Sound quality was a bit rough. It kind of went up and down a little bit, but the quality of content made up for that little bit of a sound issue there. As a competitive shooter, I think a lot of people do this. At least I tend to gravitate towards a single shooter. For instance, there are some people that they start getting into competitive shooting and they see, shooting stars, as it were, like Julie Golub or Jerry Michalak or Bob Vogel or Manny Bragg or whoever, and not necessarily latch onto them, but tend to focus more on them for any information on the given sport. And I have a tendency to look towards Ben Steger. He's a bit of a hard ass online, a bit of a troll on various forums and Facebook and things like that. But I just kind of enjoy sitting back and watching the whole thing, as well as taking in all the information that he produces, and he produces quite a bit of it. I own all 3 of his books. I believe he's only got 3 out. I've read 2 of the 3. I got the other one here on my Nexus, which I haven't just had the time to sit down and read yet. And he's also doing the Practical Pistol Show, a very frequent podcast that's broken up into small bits. I think it's anywhere from 5 to about 14 minutes the podcast episodes last, and it's really condensed and boiled down information, just really solid stuff. So when I heard that he was doing an interview with the Gun Dudes, I was pretty eager to check it out and see what he had to say. And there were a lot of interesting things in the interview. He talks a little bit about shooting outlaw IDPA. He talks a little bit about having an interest in getting more involved with IDPA, the upcoming IPSC World Shoot that's going to be here in the United States, and wanting to get involved with that. Production Nationals. He talks about Production Division USPSA. Just a lot of really good stuff that I thought was interesting that I hadn't heard before, especially the IDPA stuff. If you head over to the Duty Project forums, IDPA has a tendency to get a bit bashed over there, and when he was talking about IDPA and having an interest in it, I was really surprised. It kind of caught me off guard. So that was interesting. He talks a bit about the Beretta Elite. I believe it's the Elite 2 that he shoots or shot previously. He's recently switched to a new gun. But really solid interview and well worth checking out. I don't remember how long it runs. I think it's like 50 minutes, and the Ben Steger interview is toward the end. Probably lasts maybe 20-25 minutes, and it's really solid stuff. Definitely head on over to the Gun Dudes and check it out. The last piece of featured content that I want to talk about this episode is a match report from Tom, or Rooster, over at Fill Your Hands. And I've been following Fill Your Hands back when it was on Blogspot, and even now it's a blog that I like quite a bit, and I tend to get eager to read his match review stuff, or his progress reports, if you will. He talks about how he performed at a given match. Now this particular post that I want to talk about is a little older. As I mentioned in the earlier portion of the show, this is kind of fly by the seat of my pants, and I'm grossly unprepared. So the notes that I took for stuff that I wanted to talk about is weeks old. At least 3 weeks ago I put these notes together. So this isn't something that's hot off the presses, but it's a post that I thought was very interesting. Now, in this particular post, Tom talks about shooting bit differently than he used to. From what I understand, in his past, he was shooting more for speed and less for accuracy. He found that he could get away with shooting sloppy groups, if you will, as long as his time was good and he could do well. And since transitioning from sort of an outlaw or an IDPA or USPSA-esque sort of match into a more formal USPSA match, he's had to totally change the way he does things. And he talks about stages and how it's very important to play your own game. And, you know, he talks about developing a plan and sticking with it. And he feels as though he gets the most out of a stage when he does it that way. And I can really relate. I have a tendency to pay a lot of attention to what other people are doing when they're shooting a given match. So if I go to a USPSA match and there's a big field course, I'll develop a plan, I'll step back, and shooters will begin stepping to the line and running the stage. And sometimes I'll see them do something a bit different, and in my mind I'm re-rehearsing the stage, trying to incorporate something they did, because I think I can shoot it faster if I take my plan and revamp it slightly to include shooting targets from a different position or engaging targets in a different order. And every single time I do that, there winds up being some sort of problem. Botched reload, or reload in the wrong place. It's just something goes wrong. So I've had to step back and tell myself, look, the way I pre-plan the stage during our 5-minute walkthrough is the way that I need to run the stage. I can't continue changing my plan on the fly because it's just detrimental to my shooting. So when he talks about developing a plan and shooting the stage his way, I could really relate to that, because, you know, again, when you start changing things on the fly, it becomes really difficult to remember the nuances of everything after you've rehearsed it for 5 minutes ahead of time. And then, you know, when you're on deck, when you're the on-deck shooter, you are walking the stage, you're getting everything set in your mind. And if you've got changes between that initial walkthrough and that last walkthrough that you're going to do before you go live, there's a very big opportunity for things to go wrong. So stick to your plan, do what you think is right the first time, and work from there. From there, he talks about shooting a Texas Star in an array. There was a position that I'm gonna try to put the stage diagram up on the screen right now if I can remember to do it. And you'll see that there are a couple of different target arrays. There's one on the left, there's a port, through the port you can see a Texas Star, and then there's a target array on the right. And he talks about most shooters going left to right. So they go to the far side of the shooting area, they engage the targets, they reload, they engage the star from the middle. I believe there's also another target or two in there. I think it's 9 shots overall. And then they reload and they move to the right. And he talks about doing it a bit differently, you know, going left, then going right, then coming back to the middle, because historically he has a problem with shooting Texas Stars. And this actually prompted me to write an article for my blog, in which I think I called "Making the Texas Star Your Bitch" or something like that, where basically the Texas Star is a very predictable prop. When you start shooting plates, it just moves in a very predictable fashion. You know, if it's oriented so that it's got a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, and you go shooting off one of the arms or one of the legs, the thing gets unbalanced and starts moving all kinds of crazy. And the more momentum it gets, you know, the more wildly it moves, and you'll get to a point where this thing starts doing circles around and round and round, and it can be very difficult to shoot. And a lot of people get defeated by this prop before they ever step to the line. I know a couple of shooters, when we go to a match and there's a Texas Star in there, immediately, you know, their will is crushed. It's okay, you know, how do I plan to shoot this Texas Star dead last, because I know I'm going to run out of rounds or something like that. And the most important thing to keep in mind when shooting any difficult prop is that it's predictable and you can do it. You have to stay confident. You have to, you know, shoot at your abilities. I know that if I start chasing plates on the Texas Star, I'm going to run into problems. So I start shooting plates, and if I miss a shot and the thing starts getting out of control, I need to relax and pick a spot and ambush the plates as they come in. If I do that, it may take a little bit longer than I would have liked, but I have a better accuracy rate doing it that way rather than start chasing plates. So the fact that he shot his game as planned, and he wound up clearing the star in 6 shots, you know, or 5 shots, 6 shots, whatever it was, and I thought that was really good. It's good advice. Stick to your game plan and do what you've got to do. Just don't let yourself be discouraged when you see a prop that you've had difficulty with in the past. Take a breath, take that extra couple of seconds, and do what you've got to do to clean it. And really, that's all it comes down to. Just stay confident and shoot to the best of your abilities. So this post from Fill Your Hands was really good, well worth heading over and checking out. There's not any video footage from Tom shooting the stage. However, there is some video footage from another person that was squatted with him. So at least in addition to the stage diagrams and things like that, you'll be able to see the stage actually shot and then compare the shooter to Tom's notes. It's kind of interesting. I like doing that quite a bit. So head on over to Fill Your Hands and check it out. In this portion of the podcast, I generally do a cigar pairing. It used to be a cigar and drink pairing, and it turned into cigar and what variety of coffee I was drinking during that episode. And at this point, it is just talking a little bit about cigars, which is another passion of mine. I've been smoking cigars for, I don't know, maybe 8 years. I've been co-founder of Stogie Review for 7. I've done a variety of IPCPR cigar trade shows and various other things, and it's been a very big portion of my life. So I thought I would incorporate, the cigar thing into the podcast. But I'm waning as far as whether or not I want to continue doing it in the podcast. I don't know that a lot of listeners get much out of it, and I'm just not quite sure if I want to continue moving forward with it. I would love some feedback if you want me to keep doing it. I can easily do it. I always have a cigar sitting here when I record the podcast, but I'm not quite sure how much information you're actually getting out of it or if anyone's actually interested in it. But with that said, I'm going to do one in this episode. We'll see what happens going forward. But the cigar that I'm smoking now is the Artesanos de Miami from La Gloria Cubana. Wow, it's like amateur hour here with getting the camera to focus on the cigar band. This is one of the higher-end La Gloria Cubana cigars. A lot of people know General Cigar and La Gloria from the general release sort of stuff. The inexpensive La Gloria Cubana cigars that run $5 or $6 at your local cigar shop and sell for a couple of dollars a 5-pack or a couple of bucks a bundle, kind of a thing. And the Artesano line, when it came out a couple of years ago, was a big step up in price. Actually, I'm not quite sure what these were priced at when they were released, but I think they were upwards of $10 or $11. This release went over pretty well. It's the original release, made in Miami, and there was a limited number. I don't remember what the limited number was. I've had these cigars sitting in my humidor for several years. It was a gift from General Cigar after I recorded some footage of one of their rollers at a local event. They asked to use the footage at a trade show, and I told them, yeah, sure, just give me a box of cigars and you can have at it, do whatever you want with the footage. So they sent me a box of the Artesanos, and I started smoking them slowly. When I originally got my hands on them, they were a bit powerful. They were a bit unbalanced in terms of they were too strong and they just didn't have enough flavor behind them, especially the smaller sizes. The Coronas were just little firecrackers that were a bit too much. When they sent me the bigger ones, I think these are Elegantes or something like that, around a Churchill size, they were a much tamer cigar, and I enjoyed them much more. And after having sat for maybe 4 years, they've toned down quite a bit, and they've turned into a wonderful cigar. I've been running into an issue where a lot of the cigars that I've had for a while are starting to really just die out in terms of flavor. They're just toned way down, and they're not nearly as enjoyable as they were. This is one of the very few that I've smoked recently that has exceeded my expectations and has done very well over the years. This one is medium to body at this point. I'm not quite sure whether they're still readily available or not. There's a newer release that has 2 different wrappers on it. I think it's like split in the middle. It's Connecticut shade down the bottom, and I don't remember what they use up top, but it's a light and dark cigar. And those were pretty good, but these are definitely the better of the pair. I'm not quite sure if they released anything most recently, like last year at the last trade show. I can't remember anything coming out from La Gloria that was anything along the Miami-made stuff. But they're a very good cigar, medium body. They're not going to be overpowering. Really good flavor. If you are able to get a newer product, something that hasn't been sitting in a humidor for 4 years, it's going to be a little bolder. But if you smoke it in the evening, sometime after dinner, you shouldn't have any issues with feeling nauseous or being overwhelmed by the power or the strength or the flavor of the cigar. So all in all, really impressive cigar after a few years in a humidor, and I would highly recommend them. If you're interested in giving them a try, I don't know if Mike over at Buckhead will have them. However, you can pick up the phone and pester him. Ask him if he's got them. If he doesn't, buy something else from him. Mike comes out of Atlanta, Georgia. He is Buckhead Cigar. His phone number is 404-844-0400. I'll have to double check that number. It's been a while since I've said it aloud on the podcast. And he also has a website, askthecigarguys.com. It's not an e-commerce site where you can buy things. However, there are a listing of newer products and products on special with pricing, and shipping is included. So what you see is what you pay. Mike is a really good guy. In addition to being my favorite cigar retailer, he is also a gun nut as well. So pick up the phone, give Mike a call, order some cigars, and chat a little bit about guns. All right, well, it is time for the discussion topic portion of the podcast, and this is probably the part that you're most eager to hear about, the discharge into a guy's leg. Before I get into talking about that, I want to lead into this. There's some pertinent background information that I think is important in terms of the club's reputation is concerned, and then we'll kind of move into what happened. Being on this side of the camera, the podcast seems to have moved really quickly, so I'm not really concerned about getting long-winded here. So, I don't know, if you're pressed for time and you just want the juicy details, you can probably skip forward a couple of minutes. If not, let the story begin. So, last month, Lower Providence Rod and Gun Club ran a USPSA match. Typical USPSA match, nothing out of the ordinary. But there were a number of DQs this particular match. I believe there were 8 total for the match. I think there were probably upwards of 70, 75 shooters. I think 6 of them occurred on one bay in particular, and it changed the way the club did its new shooter briefing a bit. Now, a lot of these DQs were from IDPA shooters that were shooting probably their first USPSA match at this club, and they were accustomed to, I suppose, generous muzzle safety points. So, there's a lot of swing in the gun, and it's still considered safe. This particular club, it runs by USPSA rules. They're very hard and fast on the 180, and the club has a reputation for, and I'm not saying this in a negative way at all, being real hard asses when it comes to the ROs looking over your shoulder in terms of safety. That's not, I'm not putting down the club at all. This is very important, and I agree with the way they watch the shooters. They watch them like hawks. They will let things slide in the name of gaming. My foot may have been in or may have been over the fault line. They'll let that sort of thing go, but when it comes to safety, they're really on top of things. They're watching fingers during reloads. They've got their eyes on you like hawks during the load and make ready command. If you start swinging around and engage targets, if you are at 180.1 degrees, that's it. It's cut and dry. They don't offer leeway in that regard. Safety is safety, and they're very hard on shooters getting near the 180. If it's borderline, 179, I'm not quite sure, that's fine, but if they feel as though you've broke the 180 by, a tenth of a degree, that's it, you're done for the day. And I think that's the way all USPSA clubs should work. I'm not saying that other USPSA clubs in the area are less safety conscious or anything like that. I'm just kind of setting this up. The ROs at this club watch you like hawks, and I appreciate the way they do that. So anytime that you're running a stage at Lower Providence, the ROs are paying close attention to what you're doing. In this particular stage, it was a big field course that was set up in sort of a counterclockwise fashion. You started outside of the shooting area with your toes on sticks. Once the buzzer went off, you were to move from the sticks inside the shooting area and begin engaging targets. Now, I helped with setup that day, and one of the concerns was they didn't want to put the start position in the center because they wanted to sort of channel the flow of the shooters in a particular direction because they thought it would be safer. So they set it off to the side. Shooters get inside the shooting area, begin working their way down range, across the back of the range, and then they had to come back up range to go around the wall and engage a Texas Star. And what was happening was all of the DQs were happening during the uprange portion. Instead of reloading and then running with the gun pointed down range or walking backwards and shooting, however they planned on doing it, the shooters that were DQ'd were reloading during the retreat. And what was happening was, since they're coming up range to their left, right-handed shooters have a natural tendency to turn the gun in and reload. Well, if you're moving backwards and to your left, the gun has a tendency to point back up range. And they were running into problems where IDPA shooters that had experience with generous muzzle safety points. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I'm not dissing IDPA or their muzzle safety points or anything like that. Just when you're not accustomed to dealing with a 180, it can be a little tricky. One of the shooters in particular kind of argued the fact afterwards with the match director, because he was under the impression that the 180 was almost fluent with your body. So you've got, your body and the 180 across, and your center line here. So when you turn to engage targets to your left or turn to engage targets on your right, the 180 moved with you, which isn't the case. It's parallel to the berm. And he didn't quite understand that the 180 never moved. It never rotates. So in this case, there were a lot of DQs because the ROs were, watching them like hawks, exactly what they were supposed to be doing. So on the day of this match, or leading up to this match, I start talking to this friend of mine, Big Dog Beav from YouTube. I've shot a couple of matches with him. I've been squatted with him maybe 2 or 3 times. And it was his very first USPSA match. He had shot a number of IDPA matches, and he was interested in trying this new sport. So we talked a little bit, and I always jump on the opportunity to help newer shooters along when I can, because I like to squash misconceptions fast. He put out the feelers earlier on asking for tips on shooting his first USPSA match, and there was a lot of feedback that he had to shoot quick, and that's the name of the game in USPSA, and really it isn't. Efficiency is the key. It's not how fast you can pull the trigger. So I wanted to sounds kind of big-headed of me to say this, but I wanted to help sculpt him as a USPSA shooter. So we made arrangements to squad together. We get to the match, and the new shooter briefing takes place. Now, because of all the DQs the previous month, the new shooter briefing was a bit different than usual. They took all of the new shooters to each individual bay and walked them through every stage, handing them a blue gun and telling them, okay, these are the rules, here's your blue gun, walk the stage, and we'll talk about everything as you're moving around. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. So the club was very safety conscious going into correcting an issue that they had the month before. The new shooter briefing concludes. We do our match briefing, we separate into squads, and we start shooting. Now, I don't remember how many shooters he was in. He was the 3rd or 4th shooter of the day on that stage, and leading up to it, he asked me to video record him. Being a YouTube guy, he does a lot of video recording, mostly with point of view eyeglasses, and I was telling them that I like the third person stuff, and he wanted me to give him a hand with the camera. So I grabbed the camera and I go to his left. He's a right-handed shooter, and I've learned that if you are filming a right-handed shooter, it's very difficult to do it from the right side because the RO is there watching the finger. So I step off to the left, a couple of feet away, 15 feet maybe, and I've got the camera going, and the RO issues the load and make ready command. So he draws his gun, he inserts a magazine, charges the gun, and begins to reholster. Now, while he's reholstering, I hear a pop. I see the dirt move around the ground, maybe a foot behind him, and my heart kind of sank at that point. Here's his first USPSA match ever, and he's just disqualified himself for a negligent discharge. And a couple of seconds go by, and I start to see the blood come down his leg, and that's kind of when the panic set in. It was like, oh great, I hit the camera, I'm moving, there are people coming in to help him. I don't like blood, so I'm kind of getting out of the way to not have anyone trip over me. And I turn the camera off, I toss it on the table, and then I start helping any way that I can, as long as I'm not like in the blood. So we've got the RO and one other guy. I don't remember whether he was a scorekeeper or he was just there. The ROs had just changed, so the two of them were right there. They help him get on the ground. One takes the gun and makes it safe, and then they start addressing his wound. We've got first responders coming in. I think there was 1 or 2 EMTs shooting the match that day that were immediately in there and helping. I think one of which was on our squad, and another one came running from the bay next. There were a lot of screams to cease fire. Everyone complied, no questions asked. Everyone does what they were told. Another woman that I have a lot of respect for took charge, helping the people that were sort of back and staying out of the way, making sure not everyone was calling 911 all at once. People broke off to run to the entrances for the club, because there are 2 of them, to guide the EMTs in when they arrived. And I don't remember how long it took for people to start arriving. Less than 5 minutes for the first police officer to get there. She arrived before the ambulance did. The ambulance followed maybe 3 or 4 minutes after that. By the time the ambulance got there, the bleeding had been under control. He didn't hit anything vital. He missed bone, he missed arteries, veins, anything of importance was missed, and he was really fortunate in that regard. They took care of him, they got him loaded up in the ambulance, and off he went. Before the police arrived, they had everyone go to a safe table, make their guns safe, bag them, box them, do whatever they had to do, so that 70 people walking around with guns didn't make the police or the EMTs uncomfortable. A couple of other police officers arrived, and another ambulance arrived to assess the situation, and things worked really well. I was really proud of my squad for handling it as efficiently as they did. Actually, the whole match worked out really well. Everyone at the match handled it very well. No one got in there and got in the way. Everyone did what they were told. The bleeding was under control really quickly. Everyone did their part in making sure that this guy was safe, even if that meant just getting the hell out of the way, which I was happy to do. Again, I don't like blood. So after he's taken away, police statements are made, and there are a couple of groups of people standing around talking about the situation. They're going to do a they're going to do a debrief, in 10-15 minutes once everything settles down. And I gave everyone an opportunity to sort of talk in little groups. And I talked to the RO and the other guy that was there right behind the RO, and they both were very adamant about the shooter not having his finger on the trigger. This is where I said it's very important that we lead into this by saying that the ROs watch you like hawks. So eyes were on the finger. It wasn't in the trigger guard. Actually, the one guy said it was obnoxious how far his finger was away from the gun. It wasn't posted on the slide. It was actually pulled away and kind of stretched away from the gun. So there was no way that his finger got inside the trigger. And they also said that his shirt was tucked in. There was nothing inside the holster that could have got in there and grabbed the trigger. And initially, there were some concerns that maybe the gun was twisted going into the holster and a portion of the holster caught the trigger, but those issues were squashed really quickly, because the guys that were in the thick of it said that his holster had like powder burns at the very base. The gun was probably 90% of the way into the holster when it went off, and his finger was actually outside of the holster body when the gun went off. So there was a lot of speculation, like what could possibly have happened that this gun just went off all by itself. So it's about a week later, and Big Dog Beef posts a video talking about what happened, and he discusses the situation from his perspective. He talks about how this was an accidental discharge and that it wasn't negligence on his part, reaffirming what all of the safety officers and everyone that was watching said. But it was really interesting how fast rumors spread. I mean, between when the ambulance left and when the debrief happened, there must have been 10 different rumors of finger in the trigger, finger outside the trigger, shirt in the trigger, all of this various stuff, when it was sort of second and third and fourth hand information as these rumors were swirling around. But again, the ROs watch you like hawks, and they are very competent ROs. I would not have a problem ever being run by either of these guys ever. They are very accomplished shooters. They are very good ROs. They are very safety conscious ROs. If they say his finger wasn't in the trigger, I take it as fact. If they say his shirt wasn't inside the holster, I take that as fact as well. You know, again, they're very competent, and I'm going to take them for their word on that. There was no footage from the other side. Obviously, I was on the left side of him, so I didn't actually see the gun side, what actually happened. But, you know, again, I'm going to take the RO's word for it. And there's been some speculation flying around as to what could have went wrong. The night before the match, the shooter had replaced his striker spring. He was having trouble getting primers because he's a reloader, and he was concerned about light strikes with Winchester primers, so he swapped out the low power striker spring in his what was that, Powder River Precision drop-in kit for the stock spring. And initially there was some concern maybe that's what caused the issue, and you know, of course the issue came up. Well, you know, he installed the trigger kit himself. He could have done something wrong. I really have no idea. The police department took the gun. From what I understand, he picked the gun up by now and has dropped it off for a gunsmith to look at. After that gunsmith is finished with it, the gun's going to go to Powder River. I believe they're out on the west coast, the Seattle area, and they're going to look at the gun. And actually, from what I understand, the owner, the man behind Powder River Precision, offered to fly out to the Philadelphia area to look at the gun firsthand, but you know, he said, don't worry about it, he'll ship it out to him. And then after that, I think the gun may even go back to Springfield for them to take a look at to nail down the issue. I'm sure the gunsmith will most likely be able to determine what the problem is, and you know, that issue will be squashed once and for all. There will be no speculation, but it's kind of fun to speculate in a sense. So I've been looking at some stuff online, trying to understand better the safety features of the Springfield XD. I'm a shooter. I enjoy shooting, but admittedly, I'm not a gun guy. I don't quite fully grasp how the internals of guns work. I don't work on my own guns. I don't have a problem breaking them down and cleaning them or anything like that, but I really don't like popping pins and taking things apart. Because my biggest fear is something like this happening, where I mistakenly do something and the gun discharges when I don't want it to by mechanical failure. So, you know, I'm trying to learn a little bit about the safety features of the gun so that I can better understand what may or may not have happened here. So as I understand it, there are 3 safety features built into the XD platform. Now, I say as I understand it because I just read about it online. I haven't delved into how the safety features work. You know, I just read a couple of different posts, you know, key things on how these things work. And there are 3 features. There is a trigger safety, which is very much like a Glock trigger, where the trigger face is broken into 3 pieces, sort of. The middle portion of the trigger face extends forward and is spring loaded, so it's kind of forked, and that center trigger section has to come forward in line with the rest of the trigger before the trigger can move. And as I understand it, that doesn't do anything internally to the gun. There's I guess it's like a button on the back of the trigger that this will disengage so that the trigger can travel. Inside the gun, there is a striker safety block, which is actuated by the trigger. The trigger bar moves it out of the way. And finally, there is a grip safety on the back of the gun that is disengaged, that allows movement of the sear, and it also allows the slide to move when it is deactivated. So initially, the shooter in this case thinks that the issue was caused by a sticking striker safety block, and he thinks that maybe the block was stuck in the open position, I guess is maybe the best way to say it. And somehow, when the gun was put into the holster, that little bit of a bump allowed the striker to come free of the sear and strike the primer, because the striker safety block wasn't in the way. So that's one speculation, and I can't quite wrap my head around this. It almost seems as though there has to be the perfect storm for this to happen. The the trigger safety doesn't really come into play in this situation because I don't think it does anything internally to the gun. The striker safety block, on the other hand, is sort of disengaged by the trigger bar moving. So since the trigger didn't move, it would have had to been stuck again in the open position, I guess is the best way to say it. And then somehow the striker would have had to come clear of the sear. I don't know how the internals work realistically. So I don't know that I don't know that the striker can seat, partially on the sear and it can be bumped off. But whatever happened, there was a mechanical failure inside the gun which allowed it to discharge without the trigger being pulled to the rear. Because he had a full firing grip on the gun during the holstering process, the backstrap safety was disengaged, and this allowed movement in the sear. I guess that safety blocks the sear from moving, and since the sear was theoretically unblocked, I'm not quite sure how it would have come disengaged without the trigger bar moving, unless the striker was only partially engaged by the sear and it's sort of bumped free. I think that's what the striker safety block, I guess, is a drop safety feature which stops stuff like that from happening. But because of the way XDs work, they're essentially a single action pistol. The striker is in the fully cocked position so that you're not cocking it the rest of the way, sort of like you do with a Glock, which is considered double action. So again, I can't quite wrap my head around how something like this could potentially happen, just because I don't have a full understanding of how the gun works and the safety features work and things like. Again, I'm a shooter. I don't, I'm not necessarily a gun guy that really delves into the operation of guns and how all the mechanics work. And from what I understand, XDs are pretty complicated to begin with. There's a lot of parts in there, so I suppose that something could have been, tolerances could have been changed or something during the trigger replacement. Something could have went wrong, during the changing of the spring for the striker. But again, I can only speculate, and we should know exactly what went wrong as far as the gunsmith is concerned. I don't know, maybe a week or two, something will pop up, and I'm really eager to find out what it is. The $1 million question here, the burning question is, if something like that were to happen to you and the gun were to go off due to no negligence in your part in terms of finger control or anything like that, you have a mechanical failure inside the gun one way or the other. The gun goes off, you wind up with 4 holes in your leg. In this case, it went in and out and in and out again. 45 makes a big hole. 4 big holes. But if something like that were to happen, would you ever feel comfortable again using that gun? I don't know that I would, to be quite honest with you. I would, if that were to happen to me, I'd probably take it to a gunsmith, get the gun cleared as being functional, or get anything fixed that needed to be fixed, and I'd probably sell it. Even if I were to buy a brand new XD, just like the one I sold, I don't know that I'd want that gun that was sort of tainted with my blood on it. So that's kind of interesting. I'd really like to hear your feedback on whether or not you could keep a gun that put a bullet in you. But the incident was rattling. As we were sort of huddled up into groups, someone asked something along the lines of, "Is the match going to be canceled?" And I was very blunt when I said, "Doesn't matter for me. I'm not shooting today anyway." After having seen that, I just wasn't in the right frame of mind to do that. Everyone came together as a group and broke down every stage. The match was canceled, and money was refunded. And it's been, I don't know, I guess it was a little over a week ago. It was the first Saturday of the month. We're coming up on the third Saturday because I'm shooting a match this weekend. So it's been a little while. It still bothers me in the back of my mind a little bit, but I want to do some dry fire, get comfortable again, get that incident out of my mind, and then I've got a busy weekend this weekend. I'm shooting a USPSA match at Southern Chester Rod and Gun, Southern Chester Rod and Gun Club, I think, or no, it's whatever it is. I'm shooting a USPSA match there, and then I'll be shooting an IDPA match at Onalani the following day. So I've got to get over this little thing in the back of my mind, this little worry, and get back into shooting, kind of get back on that horse after seeing a very unfortunate incident unfold. So there is your discussion topic. It did run quite kind of long. I did have to take a little water break in there where I turned the camera off for a second to fix this parchedness. And so yeah, it got a bit long, but let's wrap this thing up and I'll let you be on your way. Well, I think that's going to about do it for episode 62 of Shooting the Breeze, the formal gun podcast of WaltonPA.com. The next episode, just like the one previous to this, I'm going to be doing a shooter profile. Because things have been kind of hectic, I've waited till the last minute to get this thing organized. So I'm meeting up with Sean Roberts this coming weekend at the Southern Chester USPSA match. We'll do the same sort of shooter bio that we did the previous episode with Kerry Woods, Sam Woods, and Jake Degenshine of the Angry Pig shooting team. You know, we'll do a little interview portion. Because this is a USPSA match, it gives me a bit more freedom to do some of the things that I wanted to do before. So we'll walk through each individual stage. We'll do a theoretical stage breakdown. I'll record Sean shooting the stages. And then maybe we'll do a little wrap-up at the end. I'm really looking forward to it. Sean is... he's a shooter that I've had my eye on a bit over the last couple of months, because when I jumped from C-Class to B-Class in USPSA production, my view of the competition changed. When I was C-Class, I was keeping a close eye on other C-Class shooters so that I could gauge my performance based on how they shot, and I wanted to know who my competition was, and I wasn't necessarily looking too far ahead. When I moved over to B-Class, I started paying a lot more attention to different shooters, and Sean was one of those new competitors that I've been keeping an eye on. I have never squatted with him. I keep an eye on the results. He's a competent shooter. He does pretty well. He's got a lot of experience with a variety of different matches, so the interview portion should be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to it, and the shooting portion should be a lot of fun too. Being that this is USPSA match, there's a lot more options in terms of shooting each stage and breaking them down. It's not like that IDPA match that we shot. So there should be additional footage. It should come out really well. I'm kind of eager to get it taken care of and record that shooter profile of Sean. So thank you for watching. I look forward to your feedback. Again, answer that question that I posed a couple of minutes back. And iTunes reviews are awesome. I love seeing them come in. Comments are awesome. Likes on Facebook are awesome. Talking about me and sharing my links on Twitter is awesome. So help me spread the word. I could really use some more views. They've been really low as of late, and I got to get out of this rut and sort of get into a better position, I think, where I was a couple of months back. So again, thanks for watching, subscribing, commenting, all the feedback that I've received over the last year and a half. And I look forward to seeing you here again in 2 weeks for episode 63. So again, stay safe, enjoy shooting, and I will catch you later.
You can hear Gun Rights Radio Network on Stitcher Smart Radio. Stitcher allows you to listen to your favorite shows directly from your iPhone, Android phone, BlackBerry, or Palm phones, on demand and on the go. Don't have Stitcher? Download it for free today at Stitcher.com or in the app stores. Stitcher Smart Radio, the smarter way to listen to radio. Gun Rights Radio Network shows can be found under Sources.